Yeah, that works. Anyway, let's get started. To begin, since I want the mechanism itself to be underground, I dug up a hole. This is 22 by 22 by 25 deep. The mark in the middle is where we're putting the rotating platform. As always, we start with a power source and transmission. I usually go with a windmill in most cases since it is easy to extend if I'm short on capacity. We're adding a rotation speed controller since we want this to go fast, and I'm also setting up several vertical gearboxes here so that 3 lines can share the same rotation source. Then we're adding what is probably one of the most powerful components in the Create mod, the sequence gear shift. This thing can be programmed to do specific actions which are performed when they receive a redstone signal. This thing is an absolute beast and massively helps streamline control and automation. On top of them, I'll be placing 3 more gearboxes so that they can all provide rotation to the same line. On top of that is the mechanical bearing, the part that actually rotates the platform our houses are going to be placed on. Note that for today, we'll be using 3 separate sequence gear shifts. One for a 90-degree turn, one for 180 degrees, and another for a 90-degree turn on the opposite direction. This should cover all the actions we want the mechanism to do. Let's make sure that we have these programmed right by testing, and you can see that we have them set correctly. Note that this assembly turns counterclockwise, which matters since it affects how we do the redstone later. Next, we need to add all the platforms. Now, something to note here are the 2 different chassis that can be used in this mod. They do the same thing, but what's important is that they don't actually attach to each other. So even if we place them side by side like this, they can move independently. Here, I'll be setting all of them to 1 so that it doesn't actually pull something that it shouldn't. Though convenient, these things can really mess up your builds if you're not careful. And that's pretty much it for the rotating base. Once we've tested that it is working as intended, we can replace the buttons with links. When dealing with links, always remember which ones are sending signals versus which ones are receiving. These ones are on the output side, so they need to receive a signal and should be set as such. From here on in, I'll be saying input links and output links to make it simple. Now we can get started on the system detection system. To do this, we'll be using content observers. Content observers can detect when a container in front of them has something in it, and if it does, it sends a redstone signal. In this case, we'll have 4 content observers, which pertains to the position A, B, C, and D. We'll designate one of the platform as a reference point and put a container on the underside. Make sure to put something inside the container so the content observer can output a signal. Here I'm putting extra filters, but these are completely unnecessary. If you don't set a filter, anything inside the container will trigger the content observer. Below these observers, I'll be placing lamps as visual aid. Then we add more links. These times, links are used to provide an input to the system, so we don't need to change their settings. Right now, you can see that the platform is rotating by itself as I place these links because we have yet to customize these links. On that note, let's begin customization. Since we'll be using a lot of links in the circuit, we have to make sure that we remember which signals are which and which are inputs and which are outputs. For my outputs, I'll be using diamonds. Remember, we have 3 outputs pertaining to specific movement. Output 1 is counterclockwise 90 degrees. Output 2 is 180 degrees. And output 3 is 90 degrees clockwise. These output are the endpoint of the system, so we're going to be linking these last. For our system inputs, I'll be using emeralds and emerald blocks. This time we have 4 system inputs, position A, B, C, and D. On top of all of this, we have 4 unique user inputs pertaining to the 4 houses we can select. Now we can proceed to the redstone circuit that handles all of these inputs and outputs. I'll be laying down several repeaters and lamps. Lamps can be replaced with pretty much any building block, but I like using them since it lets you see the flow of redstone a lot easier. Right now you can see that we have 1 input link that represents the user input and 3 links for the output. Remember that we use diamonds for the output links, and that's actually what we should be putting on. But for now, we'll be using slime as a placeholder so we can make setting and testing easier. We don't want the platform to be constantly moving while we're setting it up. Take note that we will be replacing all of this with diamonds later. The untouched link is for user input, as I've said earlier, and we'll leave that empty. For now, we need to place the links for the position input. As you should have noticed by now, this circuit is mostly based on repeaters because we'll need to use the latching system. So latches lock the state of repeaters. If it's on, it stays on. If it's off, it stays off. And we can use this to specify pathways. Aside from that, we will add a powered latch here. On the side of this powered latch, we will add a link with a system input, and on the back, a constant power source. This setup basically means that when the link activates, it turns off the power. Now to explain how this works. This here represents the user input, which we will later pair with a button. When that button is pressed, the link activates and sends a signal to the 3 output links. Then, what we want to do is make it so that when the users provide input, the signal will path to a specific output. That's where these links come in. Remember that these will be paired with the positional inputs from the rotary platform that we set emeralds with. These links will be responsible for setting the signal path by opening or closing certain repeater paths with latches. What we want to do is make it so that when the user provides the input, the signal will path to a specific output. That means when we press something and we need it to go to 1, it will go to 1 and not any other output. Mentioned earlier, we have 4 houses and hence we have 4 user inputs. For that, we need to make use 4 of these, so off to making use of the schematic system to copy and paste. Okay, with that done, we can begin actually setting this up. First thing to do is provide more visual aid. I'll be assigning colored wool for each platform so we can easily tell them apart. We will use the same colored wool to customize the user input links to make it easier. Now in order to set this up, we need to make a temporary control station. We will be placing down the colored wool and, an important note, pulse repeaters. These things convert redstone pulse signals into single tick signals. Since we have a circuit that is meant to go rather fast, a pulse signal will probably create conflicting or overlapping signals, throwing the system off, so it is important that we have a single tick going through the system. Then we'll need to know if we're getting the right output, since we haven't connected this to the outputs yet. For that, we'll just use lamps. Finally, we need a means to manually rotate the platform so we can change the position inputs. Here's a quick test. Since we don't have positional inputs yet, every button here will give up both 1 and 2 output signals respectively. Now we can begin. First, we'll need to know how to rotate the platform. Remember that our reference point is the red wool over here, and that this naturally rotates counterclockwise. So for example, from red, if we want to go to orange, we need to rotate 90 degrees counterclockwise, which is done by output 1. To go to yellow from red, we need 180 degrees, which is done by output 2. And to get to green, we need clockwise 90 degrees, which is done by output 3. Remember that the purpose is to lock out paths that we don't want the signal to go to. Since this is red, and we already have red, the system doesn't need to move at all, so we just lock it out of all paths. For orange, we need output 1, so we need to lock the path to output 2, and output 3 is locked by default. For yellow, we need output 2, so lock output 1. And finally, for green, we need output 3. To do this, we need to lock both output 1 and 2, then unlock output 3. If we don't have a powered latch here and we directly lock this off with a link like we do other paths, we would need to add 3 separate links for each circuit, because out of the 3 events, only one of them really requires unlocking output 3. So instead, we'll have it locked by default, so we only need one link. If you do it right, you should get the correct signals for each button. Something to remember is that no two buttons should lead to the same output. Once you have that settled, we can move to the next position. For the new position, you can see that all the locks need to be set again. This time we're on orange. So, doing the same thing, to go to red, we need output 3. Orange button, no output. To go to yellow, we need output 1. To go to green, we need output 2. Once the setup is done, make sure to test if the outputs are correct for each input and move on to the next position, rinse and repeat. Now that we're done with the setup, we can actually test the rotation of the platform. So let's replace all of the placeholder slabs with diamonds. First, we need to test the counterclockwise 90-degree turning, and that looks good. Then we test clockwise 90 degrees, which also looks like it's perfectly working. Then we can randomly press to see if the system can keep up. And if everything's done right, you now have a smart system. Now we need to take care of the lifter. Thankfully, this is a lot easier. First, let's extend the platform just a bit so we can more easily place the lifter assembly. Then it's just a matter of getting a power source, speeding it up, and transmitting it to a piston. I won't go to too much detail since you can honestly do this however you like. The only things to make sure here is to not overstress the system and make sure to include a clutch since that serves as our control point. Also, make sure to have enough extending posts to reach the height you need. Okay, we're pretty much almost done with the mechanism itself. Now we just need to place the houses and move the controls. Here I'm just placing some extra wool to fill out the space, then making sure that at least one of each platform is set to 2, while everything is set to 1. Again, this is to prevent anything from getting caught up. Now I already have the schematics for my houses here. When placing, keep in mind 2 things. 1. Take in mind where you want the house to be facing. 2. Keep at least 1 block distance away between each house, just in case. This is so we don't run into weird problems later. Now we just need to create the user interface, which means the buttons. You'll notice that the temporary control station has long been removed, and I had expanded the window just a bit to compensate for the added load since I wanted the lifter to go a bit faster. The interface will be built the same way we did the control station, only adding one link for the lifter. This link is connected to the clutch of the lifter assembly that I mentioned earlier. Make sure not to forget the pulse repeaters, they are important, and make sure to give it a quick test. Then we can start decorating. Okay, so basically we're finished. You can see here that I added some pictures for reference and just a bit of decoration to make it a bit more presentable. The control station on the back isn't really necessary. It really is here just for the sake of showing how the mechanism responds to the controls. Okay, in all honesty, I kinda ran out of time. My original plan was to include a lamp that shuts off and on so the user knows when the mechanism is still moving. But honestly, I'm trying to keep a one video per week schedule, and time was a bit short, so I decided to go with this. This really took quite a bit of time. I think it's already my third week on the Create mod. It has lost me so much sleep, no joke. Learning Create mod Redstone, making the circuit, and editing this video on my self-imposed schedule was a bit too much, honestly. So it turned into a bigger project than I originally thought. I'm gonna need to get better at scheduling things. Anyway, that's all for now. If you could spare a like and maybe even a sub, it'd be appreciated. If you've got some suggestions for automation and controls, leave them in the comments. I'll try to get to them. I am actually already working on my next video. It will be about fully automated programmable vertical drills, which will hopefully be done by next week. Hopefully I can finalize and clean up the redstone just a bit more by the end of this week. This is Salaryman clocking out.